All right, here's our Keynesian cross video 2, where I'm going to try to introduce you to the graph or to the curve. But first, I really want to show you some of the important vocabulary words that we're really utilizing this curve to better understand. Okay, the consumption function, autonomous consumption, disposable income. This graph at the end of the day can actually theoretically show us the savings or dissavings of an economy. This is going to give us a look back at marginal propensity to consume, real interesting. Remember, what percent of extra income or revenue does an economy consume instead of put into savings? That's going to be shown on this graph, as well as aggregate expenditures. Okay, so the main reason that I'm introducing you to this graph is, first off, if you care about economics, it really gives you a lot to think about. But of course, there's some vocabulary words that could be thrown out to you. You may have seen the term probably autonomous consumption on a previous test. And if you asked a question of like, hey, what do you mean by autonomous? My answer was, just forget about autonomous. You know what we mean by consumption. And maybe when we're done, you'll see why we were able to just kind of forget about that for the short term. But now, hopefully, we can begin to understand it in graphical terms. Okay. Having said that, our two axes of the Keynesian cross are planned expenditures and planned production. Okay. Now, we should, in very general terms, we should think of planned expenditures kind of like our product market. We're being, relatively general here, but it gives us an easier way to understand this. And then our planned production is more like the factor market. How much can we actually produce? And then the next thing to keep in mind is this 45-degree line, which I think it might be called the helper line, or it's kind of like the line of equality. If this is a 90-degree graph and this is 45-degree, this is the point where they meet each other. Okay, this is the point where like 10 would meet 10. Now, that's important because going back to the first video and what we learned earlier this year, we should know that what happens in the product market should equal what happens in the factor market. Okay, so this is kind of our point of current equilibrium. Okay, all right, now, having said that, the first kind of spot that I'm going to show you on this is the spot of, we'll call it autonomous consumption. Okay, and autonomous consumption by definition is, I hope I get this pretty perfect, is it's the amount of consumption that a society takes in when there's pretty much no or the very bottom level of income. How much would society consume if it wasn't bringing in any money, if things were really that bad? Okay, so we start there. And we should understand that there is not going to, there's not going to be that much consumption if people aren't making any money. Okay? Obviously, people have, some people have some money saved up. Some people are going to be able to buy some stuff. We're going to find a way to survive. But people aren't going to spend a lot of money if they're not making money. Okay? And then comes, as we would build what we call the consumption function. Okay, and we're being very general here. Maybe I should get a straight edge, even though in real life I shouldn't, but just to get it done, if I got a straight edge and we draw a kind of sloping up. So I'll label that C. Now think about what we're looking at here. This is the consumption function. Okay, so right here we see autonomous consumption, and this whole thing is consumption function. And then when people get additional income above and beyond autonomous consumption, that is called disposable income. Okay, so before we move on, my hope is that we can look and understand here is how much people would be planning to buy, I guess, essentially expenditures based on how much they make. Okay, and that's the consumption function. That very beginning point, autonomous consumption, how much the folks would consume when, if there was really no income, and then we see how much their consumption would increase as they do make income. Okay, now getting back to some of our terms, essentially, by the way, we are never going to have to apply this unless you go into major in economics and you're in calculus too, but this slope is the marginal propensity to consume. Okay, as people get additional income, if people have a tendency to spend more of it, then it's going to kind of kink our consumption function this way. But if as people make more money, they're still going to hold on to that money, then it would flatten it. Okay, so graphically you kind of see the marginal propensity to consume, on the slope of this curve. Okay, now for this example, we are going to pretend that we have a closed economy. We're going to pretend that there's no investment leakages. We're also going to pretend that there's no investment coming in. And for the sake of CIGXN, we're going to pretend a closed economy, just for simplicity's sake, we're going to pretend that there's no trade. Okay, so moving right along from this concept of the consumption function, we know that consumption is the main ingredient of GDP, and